NAEIC seminar. Our Equity and Inclusion Committee organized seminars for Dutch astronomy. And it's a wonderful pleasure and a great honor to welcome Professor Jocelyn Bell Burnell from Oxford University's Astrophysics Department, who will be here speaking to us today. I will say a few words of background about Jocelyn, though I'm sure many of you are familiar with Jocelyn's work. So Jocelyn Bell Burnell discovered pulsars as a graduate student in radio astronomy at the University of Cambridge in the UK, opening up a new branch of astrophysics, work recognized by the award of a Nobel Prize to her supervisor. She subsequently worked in many roles in many branches of astronomy, working part-time while raising a family. She's now a visiting academic in Oxford and the Chancellor of the University of Dundee, Scotland. She's been the president of the UK's Royal Astronomical Society. In 2008, she became the first female president of the Institute of Physics for the UK and Ireland. And in 2014, the first female president of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. She was one of a small group of women scientists that set up the UK Athena Swan scheme, and has received many honors, including a $3 million Breakthrough Prize in 2018 for fundamental physics. The public appreciation and understanding of science have always been important to her, and Jocelyn is in much demand as a speaker and broadcaster, and in that regard, we're extremely fortunate, Jocelyn, and a huge thank you for being here today. And finally, just to mention that in her spare time, Jocelyn gardens, listens to choral music, and is an active in the Quakers, and has also co-edited an anthology of poetry with an astronomical theme, Dark Matter, Poems of Space. And in that regard, I really want to welcome you, Jocelyn. I wish you were visiting us actually in the Netherlands. And also just to say a huge thank you. I'm really grateful for having known you since I was a master's student myself, and for really inspiring many of us, I think, who are in this virtual room. So really to say a big thank you, but please go ahead. And Jocelyn, a few sort of housekeeping rules. Jocelyn has asked if you can keep your Zoom cameras on, that would be nice in terms of giving the talk, and I will be moderating, so I'll be keeping an eye on the chat, but we'll try to keep questions to the end. Okay, please go ahead, Jocelyn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samaya, for that generous introduction, and thank you everybody for your interest. I hope you do find it interesting. So 3 women astronomers and a database. And it seems frozen. This is interesting. Haha. How's it going? So I'm going to say a bit about Caroline Herschel. I'm going to say a bit about Cecilia Payne Gaposchkin. I'm going to say a bit about Vera Rubin and review women in astronomy today. Caroline Herschel is much the oldest of the women I'll be talking about. She was born in 1750 in Germany into a family of military musicians. She lived a very long life and died aged 98 back in Germany, but lived a lot of her life in England, in Bath, which is near where I am, and Slough, which is quite close to Heathrow Airport now. Her mother was illiterate and didn't really understand why Caroline wanted to learn to read and write, but Caroline did learn to read and write and became her mother's amanuensis. Her father advised her that because she was neither pretty nor rich, she should not expect to get married. Her future career would be as a servant, an assistant, well, a housekeeper for one of her brothers. And sure enough, as she reached maturity, she became housekeeper for one of her brothers in Germany. He doesn't sound a very nice character. Caroline wanted to learn French. He said no. Music, no. Needlework, sewing, yes, as long as all her efforts went to make clothes for him, not her, etc., etc. Another brother, William, who was a very good musician, had moved to Bath in England to be a organ organist. And he asked the brother in Germany if Caroline could come to Bath to be his housekeeper. The brother in Germany was a little bit reluctant, but finally said yes, as long as William paid for a servant to take Caroline's place in his household. So Caroline moved to Bath. She had to learn English. She had a nice soprano voice, and she would sing at concerts, provided it was William who was conductor. But she was really rather shy. But soon after her arrival in Bath, William became interested in astronomy and started making his own telescopes. They lived in a tiny, tiny house, and Caroline was soon objecting to the fact that every room was given over to mirror making, because William's technique was to make lots and lots of different mirrors and see which worked best. And his cravats became spattered with pitch and so on. As well as learning English, she became his assistant, and they had a very good system of working. William would be out at the telescope in the dark. Caroline was within earshot at a small table with a lamp, a clock, and the book for recording the data. And as stars crossed the transit wires, William would shout, "Now!" and Caroline would record the time. So she spent most of the nights working with William. She taught herself calculus and geometry by quizzing William over breakfast. She spent the day writing up the night's results, running the household, and maybe getting some sleep. She only once complains, and that's when the ink freezes and William's feet freeze to the ground. The royal family in Britain at that time was of Germanic origin, and William came to the notice of the family, and they invited him to move, and that's why he moved to Slough, and Caroline with him. They had a house on the bank of the Thames, and they continued observing night after night, cataloguing stars, except when the Thames overflowed their observing spot. The royal family nearby, if they had some visitors and they didn't know what to do with the visitors, you may know the feeling, they bundled them all in a coach and went round to the Herschel's place to be shown the telescopes. When William was away, Caroline showed the telescopes, and it was clear she knew every bit as much about them as William did. William ultimately married. His son was John Herschel, who was also an astronomer, and Caroline felt a bit supernumerary and retired to Germany. Very late in her life, her work started to be recognized. She got a gold medal from the RAS, the Royal Astronomical Society, at age 78. She was made a member of the Irish Academy, the Royal Irish Academy, when she was 87. And the King of Prussia gave her a gold medal when she was age 96. She was a tiny woman, but she was made of tough stuff. This is the house where they lived. That grey thing is a motorcycle covered with a cover, and the front door is the one just behind that motorbike. They had a very small garden at the back as well. The house is now a museum, and it was from the back garden that William found the planet Uranus. It also is fairly tiny, as you can see. But Caroline there is described as a hunter of comets, because with a telescope that William gave her, she discovered a lot of comets. Comets, they're lovely things, beautiful things, but there you go. My second woman also has British links. It's Cecilia Payne Gaposchkin. She was born near Oxford in 1900. Also lived to a good age, spent a lot of her adulthood in the USA and died there in 1979. Her father had been a university fellow. They weren't allowed to marry, and at quite an age, he resigned his fellowship and married. But he died when Cecilia was still quite small. She had a good education at a school in London called St. Paul's School. The music master wanted her to become a professional musician. He was a well-known violinist. Well, she was a violinist. He was a well-known musician, and he obviously knew what he was talking about. But she was determined to do science, having had quite a fight to get to do it. She got a place in the University of Cambridge to do biology. She had an aunt who was a biologist. That's probably why she chose biology. But during the first term of her first year, she was lucky enough to get a ticket for a big lecture given by Sir Arthur Eddington. Arthur Eddington had been out observing the eclipse in 1919, the eclipse that demonstrated that light was bent in the way that was predicted by Einstein. And he was a brilliant lecturer, and Cecilia absorbed his lecture. When she got back to her room, she could write it out word for word, and was so struck by it all that she decided no more biology. She's going to do physics. So she did physics ultimately, and a certain amount of astrophysics with Eddington. Eddington advised her that she wouldn't be able to do a PhD in the UK. She'd better go to the USA. So as a new graduate, she emigrated to Cambridge, USA, and joined the Harvard Observatory, except she didn't officially. Women weren't admitted. Women belonged to Radcliffe College. But she did a PhD. It was a striking one. She discovered that from the spectra that a lot of stars contain a lot of hydrogen, and nobody would believe her. But she couldn't find what was wrong with her results. So she ended up writing her thesis on that, and indeed writing some papers on that. Her thesis ends with the comment that this result is almost certainly wrong. Her observations were repeated by more senior astronomers over the next few years, and it was found that she was actually right. Stars are largely made of hydrogen. She stayed on in Cambridge at the observatory, one kind of temporary paid post, part-time post, unpaid post after another. It was only when the university made her head of department that they had to find her an office. Up till then, she'd used a cupboard as her office, and they had to find her a salary. But for a long time, the president of Harvard would say no female professors. So her progress officially was blocked. But she was an excellent astrophysicist, just working under adverse conditions. This is Newnham College, Cambridge, where she started her undergraduate work, where she was going to be a biologist. My third woman is Vera Rubin, and she's important for the discovery of dark matter, which came, as you may know, through the discovery of through studying the rotation of galaxies. So I have got some nice pictures of galaxies, just in case you don't know what a galaxy is. I'm sure you do. So Vera died just a few years back. After a long life, she spent a lot of it in the Washington area at the Carnegie Institute, I think because she didn't have to teach. If she worked there, she could do research. She and her husband had a large family, 4 children, one of whom, Judith Young, predeceased her of cancer, and a husband who died shortly before she did. Her husband was almost as remarkable as she was, because he was prepared to help with the childcare and the housework to enable her to do research, and in particular to go on observing trips. She studied the rotation of galaxies, the rotation of stars, and found that basically they were rotating too fast. The galaxies should be centrifuging apart. They clearly weren't centrifuging apart. This is a typical rotation curve. The dashed line shows how the rotation rates should drop when you get to the edge of the galaxy. That's following Kepler's laws. But in actual fact, the observations followed something more like the solid line, and so showed no sign of dropping, so no sign of there being any edge to the galaxy, at least not yet. And she went out right to the edge of the visible galaxy, and the rotation curves were still holding up. Subsequently, radio astronomers joined her and extended the data much further out, studying the rotation of hydrogen gas. I think I've probably said all of that. The rotation curve should drop, and it didn't. So the conclusion is that in order for all this galaxy, or the visible bit of the galaxy, to hold together, in spite of this high rotation, there must be additional invisible material providing gravitational attraction. And that's the origin of dark matter. Well, that's how dark matter came to enter our vocabulary. What the origin of dark matter is, of course, is an interesting question. The same thing was applying to clusters of galaxies, which should have been centrifuging apart. The galaxies seem bound in the cluster, so again, extra material needed to bind the clusters. And ultimately, the viewing distorted images of objects behind the cluster, also allowing more significant measurement of the mass of the cluster and determining what fraction of it was dark matter. So turning now to women in astronomy today. The International Astronomical Union is the body I'm going to be talking about for most of the rest of this talk. Around about 1990, its General Secretary was a British man, Derek McNally. And Derek McNally was approached by some women astronomers who were concerned at the small fraction of females, of astronomers who were female. But Derek declined to take an interest, saying the IAU regards itself as a body devoted to the promotion of the astronomical science, and to this extent has tried not to cross the line into matters of social concern. Roll on a few years, Johannes Andersen is the General Secretary of the IAU. One of the jobs of the General Secretary of the IAU is to maintain the membership database. And the IAU is a little bit unusual compared with bodies that might be similar, you think, like the International Physics Body or the International Mathematics Body. The IAU is unusual because not only does it have national bodies in membership, it also has individual membership. Now, Johannes's wife, Birgitte, is also an astronomer. She is still alive. And she was having terrible trouble getting jobs in astronomy in Denmark, whereas Johannes didn't have really much trouble at all. And he began to wonder whether Birgitte was having problems because she was a woman, or maybe because originally she wasn't Danish. And he realized he could answer his own question because he held the membership data for the IAU, and in particular, the individual membership. So he started keeping the individual membership data segregated by gender, as well as segregated by country. And so for about 20 years now, the IAU has had its membership data segregated by gender. So this is well, it's now getting on to be a year old, isn't it, this database? I must update it. I looked at the membership data for countries that had more than 200 astronomers, so that the root N errors would not be too large. The world average for all countries is 19% female. As of June last year, the country that had the highest fraction female membership was Italy at 28%, followed by France 26, Brazil 23, Spain 22, Russian Federation 21. The Netherlands came in at 19%. It was the next country. I haven't put it in there because of this talk. That's where it's at. And that is the world average. Below the average come the English-speaking countries. USA, Canada, India, China, Germany, UK, and Japan. Well, Japan has always been low. But I think there are some interesting trends in this data. We have European countries, the more southern ones. The more northern ones, Netherlands and Germany, are lower than the southern European countries. The English-speaking countries all cluster at the world average or below. Incidentally, the USA makes up about a quarter of the whole membership, so it's pretty clever of it to be below the world average, because it must pull the world average strongly towards itself. But the English-speaking countries are below the world average. The UK used to be up there, but I fear it has dropped. China, okay. Russia, the women there have always had to work, so I can understand that. So there are some biases probably in that data. The main membership is for tenured astronomers. There's now a junior membership, and so the younger women are beginning to be counted. You have to be nominated by your country's astronomical society. So women may be overlooked more than men. And there's the URL for the database if anybody wants to go look at it. I've probably said most of this. South America, Southern Europe, high. English-speaking countries, Northwest Europe tend to be low. It's not women's brains that are different in these countries. This is culture. I'm told there are similar distributions for physics and maths, but as I've explained, there's no data for them. But I would expect there'd be similar distributions for physics and maths. So possible cultural factors that bring about these differences. Men are in other subjects which are considered more prestigious. Maybe engineering is perceived as being more prestigious. So the men go there and leave astronomy for the women. Maybe you're in a culture where your parents still live nearby. They could help with childminding, which would make quite a big difference. Or maybe you live in a country where there's a great diversity of incomes. So there are lots of poor people, poor women in particular, who'd be only too happy to come into your house, be your nursemaid, your cook, your cleaner, your laundry maid, etc., while you go off and be an astronomer. I've looked at the age distributions of the membership. Now, the IAU introduced junior membership partway through the period I'm looking at, so the database is a bit confused, but I've taken the total number of individual members, including junior members, and put them in 10-year age brackets. And the women's age distribution peaks here, age 35 to 45. The male distribution peaks somewhere about here in the second half of the 50s, I would guess. I find these numbers quite interesting. Women tend to live longer than men, but even still now, for this age group, the male dominates the women by an enormous amount. But it is looking better, except that a number of these younger women are junior members and may not stay on in the profession. Well, the men, junior members, may not either. And I wonder which group is most affected or has been most affected by coronavirus lockdown. And how will that play out in the long run? I don't know. I can't tell. But it'll be interesting to watch these figures. I've also looked at changes between 2016 and 2020. And for this, I've looked at countries with greater than 100 members. The female world average has risen from 17% to 19% in 4 years. Yippee. Well, at least it's rising. But there was this junior membership introduced in the middle, and I suspect there's a larger proportion of women there, so that will have helped. High risers in the last 4 years. The Netherlands has risen from 10% female to 19% female. It has almost doubled. I would love to know how you've done that, folks. That's really dramatic. Chile has risen by 6%. India has risen by 5%. Belgium, Germany, Italy, Mexico, South Korea, USA have all risen by 3%. Britain's gone backwards in the league because it hasn't risen at all. So I'd be interested to hear afterwards how Netherlands has achieved this large increase in percentage female. And the IAU itself has had its first female secretary, Teresa Lago, and its first female president, whom I'm sure you know, Evine. Now, in many areas, there is a larger proportion of women. But I wonder how well embedded, how thorough the change is. Are we simply enabling more women to climb the ranks, a bit like the way ivy will climb up a wall, without altering the wall underneath in any significant way? Are we enabling women to climb the existing structures, or are we adapting the structures in any way to be more gender neutral? A snippet that I've picked up from McKinsey's, the business consultants in the United States, I think is encouraging and is something I want to keep saying. McKinsey's have shown that companies are the most diverse, particularly at executive and board level, are more robust, more flexible, and more successful than companies that are less diverse. If that's true in business, presumably it's also true in academia and research. Change is happening. It comes a little slowly, but sometimes we can actually see the change, which is rather nice. In the 1930s, there was a rather stupid Earl of Birkenhead who decided to declare what the world would be like in 2030. In 2030, women will still, by their wit and charm, inspire the most able men towards heights that they could never themselves achieve. Charming. A survey in 1946 in the USA showed that 65% of people thought men were smarter than women. But by 2018, 86% think men and women are equally smart. So there has at least been some movement there. And with that, I will finish the slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn, for that wonderful talk. So I want to open the floor now to questions, because we do have quite a lot of time for discussion as well as questions. So please raise your hand, for instance, in the Zoom chat. I'm just looking at the moment. Are there any raised hands? There's so many. Michael, Mike Wise, please go ahead.
Hello, Jocelyn. Thanks for that great talk. I'm curious that I was surprised by this. That you asked how the Netherlands made its improvement. I think that'd be an interesting thing to discuss. I'm also curious what happened in the UK that they've moved backwards. Can you put your finger on what was behind that?
I suspect it was taking the eye off the ball, as they say in sport. I think probably we relaxed, we forgot to keep monitoring the data. Mm-hmm. Maybe we've been slow to bring women into membership. I don't know how it works in the Netherlands, but our professional body, the Royal Astronomical Society, is the one that forwards names to the IAU for membership. And I guess they just haven't been watching the gender balance.
Well, I guess it struck me, of course, because, we often point to things like Athena Swan, which originated in the UK as inspirational things that we should adopt or at least adapt. And so it was somehow striking for me that people, that a country that had a sort of leading position in this area should lose it.
It's actually got worse than that. The IAU released a new database just a few weeks ago. I haven't, well, maybe even less than that. I haven't got it into my PowerPoint yet. But broadly speaking, what's happened is countries like Netherlands and Britain, the fraction of women is going up, but Britain has been slow to rise, and everybody has risen past us except Japan. That's pretty bloody brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. Well, maybe we can come back to the discussion about what the Netherlands has done.
Mm.
That would be useful, Mike. I'll pass the floor to Ilse van Bemmel.
Oh, yes, thanks. I just wanted to follow up on what Mike was asking, and I was wondering, since you mentioned this a few times, that in the middle sort of this database exercise, the junior membership was introduced. So did you also check if this increase in the countries was due to adding the junior membership, if the age balance has also changed in that time?
No, I haven't, and I could, and I probably should. So that's a useful suggestion, Ilse. I've only worked with the total figures, but I could disaggregate them.
Yes, yeah. I would be very curious to see how that works out. Thanks.
Thank you for the suggestion.
Thank you, Ilse. Do you have another question, Ilse?
No, that was it. Thanks.
Okay, and then Elisa Constantini.
Hi. I was wondering about this difference between the English-speaking countries and the Southern European countries, France, Spain, and Italy. Of course, they are known to have a different school system from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And so I was wondering if, this could be a reason why there are few women in STEM in general and in the Northern Europe.
I think a lot is down to a lot of gendering of children happens very, very early. There's been an interesting exercise in Britain. You can follow it up on a website if you are interested, called Let Toys Be Toys. And it's the gendering of toys for young children. Pink princesses for girls and blue construction kits for boys. We're gendering children very, very, very early. And we don't seem to notice we are. So I think in Britain, a lot of the trouble is the pretty princess image for a small girl. And, that tends to carry over unless it's very consciously broadened by parents who are alert to these kinds of issues. I don't know. Does that help, Elisa, or have I failed to understand the thrust of your question?
I was more wondering about the school system. So I know, for example, in Italy, I'm from Italy, boys and girls don't choose very early, their path.
Mm-hmm.
They choose when they are 18. So then perhaps this helps, forming the same people with the same knowledge up to, late.
Yes.
While here, for example, in the Netherlands, you choose pretty early. Of course, there are shades of it. So it's not black and white, but
in Britain, you choose fairly early as well. Yeah. So that may be part of it. Indeed. But I suspect the general populace doesn't see anything wrong with gendering. So it's okay. Making the school system more consistent would help, but it'll take a long time to solve.
Thank you.
We have a comment from Janina Biondi in the chat who says, very interesting, the astronomer share of women in Argentina is also high, and we don't choose earlier final higher education. So,
That is interesting. Yeah.
thank you, Janina. I'd like also to ask students as well as early career scientists, also please do raise your hand and ask any questions that you may have to Jocelyn. Yeah, Jocelyn, so from your experience also traveling different countries as well as looking at the statistics, are there any, I remember hearing one of your talks, I think in 2007, where you talked about the need to also have structural change to address these issues. For instance, in the introduction of the Athena Swan, I wondered if there were any things you've seen implemented aside from the Netherlands, which we'll discuss in a bit, about what you have been sort of particularly impressed with in terms of actual structural changes that have gone on.
Yes, I think Athena Swan has been an important development. And I say that even though I was part of it. For those who aren't aware, this was set up by a group of senior women scientists who were concerned about the low numbers of women in science, in academia in Britain. And one day, our chief medical officer for health, who holds research funds, was meeting with the heads of medical schools in Britain. And they had the kind of discussion that heads of medical schools have with medical funders and so on. And at the end of the meeting, she said, "You're all men. Where are the women?" And they said, "Oh, doesn't matter." And she had, as she put it, a rush of blood to the head. And she said, "If you want to have the opportunity to apply for my funding, you have to hold Athena Swan Bronze by this time next year." Athena Swan is an accreditation scheme that demonstrates that your department or your university is women friendly and is doing its best to even up the ratios. That approach got adopted by some other research councils, and that began to make a really big difference. It also created a hell of a lot of work for people, partly because, the database in physics was different from the database in biology, and the two wouldn't talk to each other. And so it was a big job putting together submissions and so on. Gradually got evened out. It got exported to Ireland, exported to Australia, exported to arts, humanities, social sciences, where the issue is not where are the women, but where are the men. And it's been taken up in the United States, and it's coming in there as sea change. And it's not just gender, it's other diversity issues as well, being run by the AAAS. And in Britain and in other countries, that really got forced along when the research councils, the funding body, said, you have to hold Athena Swan Bronze before you can apply for our funding. And that really drove it. Its death knell was that people will say, well, we've got this big database for Athena Swan. Why don't we also ask them a question about this, and ask them a question about that, and ask them a question about something else? and stuff got added on and added on and added on till it became an enormous job. And there's been a bit of a rebellion. But it's certainly opened people's eyes to gender issues and increasingly to other diversity issues as well, and has been responsible for a big step forward in the UK.
So are there any, sorry, I'm just looking through the Zoom. Are there any questions from other audience members?
I have a question from YouTube.
Oh, yes.
On the live stream. So Dora comments that coming from the European South as well, and from the Balkans also, she would say a large advantage is the generous maternal leave, in addition to women having a large history of taking part in the labor force in the East and the Iron Curtain. She'd be curious to see if there's any data on how improving maternal leave and childcare options at work affects the percentage of the women in astronomy. Do you have thoughts on that?
That's a very good point. I don't know that we have the data. I don't know that anybody is collecting the data. There is data on things like the pay of women and men, and for instance, the fraction of women at top board level in businesses. So that's being monitored and occasionally commented on. But I'm not sure of any more detail than that, to be honest.
Jake, are there any other questions on the YouTube stream?
There are not yet.
Okay, so maybe we can return to the question that Jocelyn posed to the Netherlands, to the Dutch audience here. And maybe Mike, would you like to say something with, as sort of director of ESRON, our Space Science Institute, why you think progress may have been made in the last 10 years in terms of that doubling?
But I wish I knew the answer is what I'll start with. I mean, of course, I'm happy to see that we made some progress, and some of that may be the taking into account the early career researchers in 2018. Of course, I think part of it is simply focus. You know, it in the last 10 years, it has certainly gotten a lot of attention, and there's been a lot of, I don't think there's any single one thing that the Netherlands has done, but they've definitely put it sort of at a higher level of priority, and, you know, imperfectly perhaps, but, you know, certainly worked on it. And you see that in things like the WISE program, you know, that was implemented by, not named after me, I have to say, that NVO put in place to, you know, attract, you know, and support, you know, female researchers at the institutes, and so other things like that. So I don't think we can put our finger on a single activity, but I think it's just, as you say, keeping your eye on the ball and keeping it at a level of priority that it gets attention, which is a cautionary tale, of course, because you see what happened in the UK when you don't.
If I may add to that, hi Jocelyn.
Hi, Thijs.
It's also a question of awareness that there is an imbalance and that needs to be fixed. And that awareness, I think, has been around for more than 20 years. But then actually doing something about it is a different story. And it's about, I think, 20 years ago that various universities, and I think it started in Groningen, started a special program to hire women, early career women, basically on the path to become eventually a full professor. And that in the last sort of 20 years has definitely helped around the country to increase the number of female staff members. But then, of course, you also get the additional effect that there are role models, and that also increases the number of female students and graduate students.
I was on a visiting committee at Dwingeloo quite a good many years ago now, and noting the very few women then working at Dwingeloo. And we were told that one of the significant limiting factors was that at lunchtime, the schools shut and the children went home for lunch. That stops women working very effectively.
Many schools still do.
Really?
Yeah, it's changing, but it's not the standard to have lunch in school yet.
Yeah, that is appalling. I remember, but this is like 30 years ago in Hogeveen, when my kids went to school. They came home in during lunch, and we actually started with several parents an effort that they could stay at school and have the lunch there and play, but parents had to be there. The teachers would have nothing to do with it. They only gave the opportunity of having a location, but the parents started that. Yeah.
Anna, please. Anna Watts.
Yeah, so I think partly it is awareness, and I think things like the LNVH, so the National Network of Female Professors, which publishes a monitor every year, which just shames the Netherlands in terms of how terrible they do compared to the rest of Europe in terms of full professors. They give a university by university breakdown, that kind of thing. I mean, it's awareness, but it's forced awareness. That has really helped. And having that committee going around talking to university deans and rectors about how things need to change, that has helped enormously. Then concrete schemes like the Rosalind Franklin scheme, the McGillivray scheme in Amsterdam, to bringing in female tenure trackers or more female, more senior female scientists as well, to put them in positions. And that comes again from individual deans and department heads deciding that this is something that needs to be done and kind of giving into pressure to actually do it. So it's very concrete steps that have been taken to put this into place. Funding authority putting pressure on as well by things like the Aspasia scheme, which gives you extra funding if you get a grant and you then get tenured as a result of it. There's an extra boost in funding that used to come along with it as well. So yeah, it's partly individuals, but also very concrete schemes that have helped, I think, to push things. And yeah, at some point you start to get more of a critical mass, the environment starts to change a bit. I mean, certainly in the however many years I've now been here, I came in 2008, and there was kind of Sarah in Amsterdam, Sarah Markov, and that was it, basically. The environment has changed enormously just by having, I think, a large number of mouthy women around. And you gradually see that whole environment change. I hope for the better. I'm looking at Samaya laughing, maybe it's not for the better, but hopefully for the better, that once you get a few people in there and kind of hanging in there and starting to change things, it really starts to improve things. And I've noticed a huge change, particularly in the last 5 years or so, just with more and more of us being around, also in physics.
Mm-hmm. You have to judge it carefully, though, because if you push too hard, you get labeled as a nuisance, a troublemaker.
Well, in that case, it really helps to be foreign, actually, because people expect Americans and British people to be annoying. So I think we have a massive advantage, actually, I think, compared to Dutch women, honestly, that people expect it from us, and it's fine, weirdly.
Is that why we still don't have that many Dutch women in higher positions?
That is true.
We're trying to pave the way by being really irritating. Thanks. I think, honestly, it really helps, actually, to be a foreign woman in this regard. Because people have very low standards of behavior that they expect from you, and it's fine.
Well, more power to your elbow, Anna.
Giovanna.
Hi, Jocelyn. Thank you very much for the nice talk. When I arrived here in the Netherlands, it was 2006. And the women in 2006 in astronomy here in the Netherlands were really few. I arrived from Germany, and over there weren't that many, but I am Italian, so for me there were many, in Italy at least.
Yeah.
But what was for me shocking was that when they shut down the Department of Utrecht, I'm speaking of 2012, the only research we didn't get the permanent job in another institute was the only woman who was in Utrecht. So it means that still in 2012, the situation was not as changed as one would expect. But I can tell you that now, 2021, you can feel the difference. At least in Amsterdam, where I am, you really can feel. But then it is the concentration, the mass that changed. We have strong women with a lot of interest in this that are bringing out the voice of women. Then it is, then it depends on the women who are there and what they are doing and the single institute. At the general level, they are helping a lot to do grants and to support young women, so that's a change. But it is going slowly, but at least it's starting to move. And I have 3 kids in school, and I can tell you that to have kids in school in the Netherlands as a working mother, it's a nightmare. Luckily, my husband is an astronomer, so we help each other. We are very flexible, but believe me, the two-body problem in the Netherlands is critical still. And to have kids that are not that old, they are still 13, 12, 14, it is a huge handicap, if you allow me the word, still.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Giovanna. We have a couple of comments in the chat. So sorry, I have to scroll up. Ethan Van Workum, who is in public transport at the moment, so cannot speak, wanted to add, Ethan's a master student. He wanted to mention that each year the Dutch Physics magazine publishes the annual university physics entrance figures. In the past 5 years, there's been a large increase in the influx of students and females percentage-wise. In the past 10 years, there was a big secondary school campaign and restructuring for STEM, and it seems to have borne fruit. These students have yet to become astronomers, of course, but it may be related. Jelle de Pla, in response to that, mentioned in the 1990s, there was also a change in the Dutch high school system that has turned out to be relatively beneficial for women, for girls, which is, I think, one of the factors in the increased inflow of women in universities, astronomy and physics in recent decades. Anwesh Majumdar, a PhD student, is asking, doesn't the funding agencies in the Netherlands now demand diversity and inclusivity as well? Would anyone like to answer that question? Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, so the answer to that is no, not in a formal Athena Swan kind of sense. However, so it's not directly tied to funding. It's certainly at least not at the institute level, and I think that's true for personal grants as well. But it is taken into account. So in the case, for example, of the NVO institutes, it is part of our evaluation process. So it's not directly tied to funding, but it is part of our performance evaluation. So that's one of the criteria that they look at to see if we're making improvement, and it goes in our formal reporting, and I'm expected to show progress. I'm actually held accountable ultimately. So, but we haven't quite closed the loop to direct connection to funding yet, though. I think we're getting closer.
Of course, the Hubble Space Telescope moved to double-blind refereeing. Neither the referee nor the applicant knew who the other person was, and that produced a remarkable increase in the fraction of women being successful.
Yeah.
So that's maybe the way the world has to go. You know, you've a separate cover sheet that gives the personal details, and the rest of the case is gender neutral.
Anwesh, sorry, do you want to follow on?
Yeah, so I would just like to add that 2 things. One, that the Chandra proposal team has also started this double review from this year. So that is an improvement. And another thing I would like to add is that, so I have noticed that our institute, Anton Pannekovic Institute, also like releases this few yearly, like what is the progress within the institute among, what is the percentage of female members, or what is the percentage of female faculty members, so sort of survey over 10 years and so on, like, and they set target about what to improve. So last year we had this committee as to what is going to be the plan for the next few years. So I guess these things also help in the Netherlands as to how we can improve this stuff. Yeah.
Thank you, Anwesh. Anwesh is actually, we started an EID committee that Anna Watts and Jean-Michel Desert are co-chairing in Amsterdam. And Anwesh is one of the graduate members of the committee. So working on equity and inclusion and diversity. So I think looking at all of these numbers at the university level. I'll move on to Andrea Gombok, who is joining us from Slovenia, and she wanted to mention that regarding the previous question regarding maternity leave, I thought I can share experience from Slovenia. Andrea, would you like to speak actually, or yes, you're there, I can see you. You can say this.
Okay, I can also say it. So yes, we have a 12-month fully paid leave in Slovenia. And most of the women are working also in other professions. So But we still have only about 20% of women in physics and in astronomy. And I think the problem is that already at the level of students, when they are choosing their career paths, they are not selecting physics and astronomy. I think it's just due to this broader social impact, media expectations, and so on. I should also add, because there were some additional comments in the chat, that this 12-month paid leave in Slovenia can be shared between both parents, which is also something that we are strongly supporting, especially women in science, because yes, otherwise there is a danger that women are less wanted as co-workers in the lab or in the research group. But now it is improving. Initially only women were taking this leave, but now more and more men are also taking that.
Yeah, maybe I can comment, because I was the one saying that it's important that these leave options are available for both genders. And Jake already mentioned that it's even more important that it's almost enforced that you have both genders taking equal amounts of leave, because what frequently happens, and what I see happening in the Netherlands, is that many of these leave options are mainly used by the mother and much less by the father in the family. And that's also part of the culture where men are expected to work and are actually still literally told that if they want to have parental leave, they will not see that promotion happening in the next couple of years.
Yep, that happens here too. Yes.
I mean, in principle, maternity leave is relatively short here. So it's 16 weeks, but you have to take 4 before the birth, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Fathers get, is it now 5 days? It was 2 days.
Yeah, it's 5 days paid, and I think nowadays also 5 days unpaid starting this year.
Okay. And then there's parental leave, which is I think 3 months full time or something over the first however many years of your kid's life that you can take as you want. So you can use it to take a half day every week, and that you can split. And I think at least again in Amsterdam, there's now more of a culture again of fathers also using their parental leave as well, and that now seems to be quite well established, that both men and women are using the parental leave. But yeah, the maternity-paternity split is still diabolical.
Thanks.
But one other thing is also having the discussion with your boss about reducing your workload because you are on parental leave. And at least that was a bit of a barrier to get through, that yes, I'm going to be here 90% of the time, therefore 10% of my work has to go away, and it can't just be my research work.
Yep.
And also still trying to get a column in the timesheets that says parental leave. So I was told that PIs don't take parental leave, so they wouldn't make me a column.
Oof.
By our human resources office, who eventually made me a column that never connected up to the financial system. So I got an error message every time, but they did make me a column eventually. But that's also a mindset to get through, that you can still be a good researcher and work an 80 or 90% contract.
Yeah.
But we're getting there.
Janina Biondi, thank you, Anna. Janina Biondi in the chat has a very good question. I wondered if you want to ask it, or would you like me to ask it? Sorry, Janina, I can't see you on. She says I can ask it. Okay, so Janina's asking, could you comment about the policies taken to balance the gender ratio? Some people tend to internalize the idea that they are a token to make the institute appear nicely in numbers. I have heard a comment from a fellow woman colleague saying that it is easier to get a fellowship now if you're a woman, as if that was a bad thing. How can we talk as a community of the policies that are being taken and the target goals and time in a way to engage with more people? So.
Yep, there have been unintended consequences, particularly of the Athena Swan scheme. I know of quite a few postdoc women who are getting a lot of interviews for tenured jobs. And they say they believe they're invited along because the number of women and the number of men interviewed is counted, but that the organization doing the recruitment has no intention of appointing them. They're simply there to make up the number of women interviewed. And I think that can happen at all sorts of levels. I trust we will grow out of this attitude as more women actually get appointed. But it's one of the things that is happening at the moment. Another thing that happened in the engineering department in Oxford, where there are predictably very few faculty women in the department. And the faculty women that there were being very heavily used to sit on interview panels because the gender breakdown of interview panels is monitored. And finally, these women went on strike and they said, no more interview panels. So the department had to train up some of the younger women to sit on interview panels, which is probably very good experience for the younger women and probably good experience all round. But these are the kind of things that can happen, hopefully only in the interim, as we try and change the way our society is working. And I'm sure other people can think of other kinds of examples like that.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And I think given the time, Giovanna, is your hand up or is it lower? Sorry. Okay, so Jake has a question. Jake, please go ahead, and then we'll.
So I will, we were chatting a little bit about it in the chat, and I'm now becoming the sub-working group chair for the big EC working group in the IAU for LGBT issues. So I asked the question about how non-binary and transgender people are recognized in this spectrum, and also including in the IAU survey. But also I was trying to find that out in a workshop some of us had from our committee last Friday in the Netherlands, what actually counts, and for these initiatives, whether a trans woman is able to apply depending on what their birth gender is and how those things are measured, and what your opinions are on that measurement and how to try to deal with that sort of situation.
I note that the IAU database only asks, are you male or female? There are no other options. And out of the 14,000 members, apparently only 4 have declined to say whether they were male or female. Now, clearly that's something that's got to change. It's going to make the job that people like me do a bit more difficult, because having just 2 columns is very neat to deal with, but it doesn't reflect real life. I hope the IAU does broaden its categories very, very soon, because it's beginning to look very bad if they only offer 2 options, male and female. And similarly for other bodies, but it's often the case that people have to prod these bodies a bit, poke them a little bit to make them change. And the real art is knowing how hard to poke, particularly if there's only one of you doing the poking. It's better if you can get a number of people to poke.
Yeah, I think probably you saw the thing about the AAAS in the US that was, so they're trying to do this gender survey based on people's names, submitted things to meetings, and using some algorithm that takes the name and country of origin and then predicts your most likely gender and then assigns that to you historically through the AAAS history. So hopefully the IAU won't go down that path, because
particularly with a name like Jocelyn.
Adequate consternation.
Yep. Yeah, we've got a lot more learning to do, haven't we? And a lot more work to do, to be honest.
Indeed.
Without a doubt. So on that note, given the time, I'd really like to thank Jocelyn on behalf of everyone here and also attending on the YouTube live stream. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us virtually in the Netherlands. We hope that we can welcome you in person, Jocelyn, in Amsterdam and Leiden and Groningen and Nijmegen and Utrecht, everywhere. But really a big, big thank you. I hope you can see the Zoom is like coming up in yellow with lots of claps. So really a huge, huge thank you on behalf of all of us for your time, and thank you for visiting.
And thank you for a very interesting discussion too. Dank u wel.
Dank u wel. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.